Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. And today we are going to be looking at the topic: Are Black lives being targeted? Eugenics, euthanasia, and the new population control. This is the topic for this evening, and I hope that you will be joining me shortly. Now, eugenics is the idea that humanity can be improved by encouraging reproduction among people considered genetically or socially fit and discouraging or preventing reproduction among those deemed unfit. So the word eugenics was coined by British scientist Francis Galton in 1883. Galton, a cousin of Charles Darwin, applied ideas about heredity and selective breeding to human beings. Francis Galton, the intellectual founder, he was the one who coined that term and also who was behind some of these ideas, or the majority of the ideas of eugenics. Galton believed that desirable human characteristics could be encouraged through selective reproduction. His ideas became the foundation of the organized eugenics movement in Britain and eventually the United States. Now, you also had another one called Carl Pearson. Statistics and Heredity Pearson helped give eugenics a statistical and academic infrastructure. He established a biometric laboratory at the University College of London and conducted research into heredity and human characteristics. We also have Charles Davenport, and he's an American, or was an American eugenics. Davenport became one of the central figures in American eugenics. The Eugenics Record Office in Cold Spring Harbor collected family and hereditary information and helped promote the idea that characteristics such as intelligence, criminality, and social behavior could be inherited in relatively simple ways. That assumption was profoundly flawed. We also have Harry Laughlin. Eugenics becomes government policy. Laughlin was important architect of American compulsory sterilization policy. His model legislation influenced state laws, and we also have Indiana enacted the first compulsory sterilization law in 1907, and eventually roughly 30 states operated eugenic sterilization programs. Estimates put the number of people forcibly sterilized in the United States at least at around 60,000. That's a lot. Then we have Buck versus Bell. When eugenics became constitutional policy, one of the most disturbing episodes was Burke versus Bell, and that was in 1927. Now, Carrie Buck, a young Virginia woman, was labeled feeble-minded and forcibly sterilized. The U.S. Supreme Court held Virginia's sterilization law. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. wrote the notorious phrase, "3 generations of imbeciles are enough." The historical record is particularly troubling because later evidence indicated that the supposed hereditary defect used to justify sterilization, Carrie Buck, was deeply questionable. Okay, so this was policy and this was science, according to them. Now, today we like to call it pseudoscience, but in the 20s and onwards, it was the science. And that is what we have to understand. Let us look at eugenics and race. This is where the topic it becomes more particularly relevant to Black history and what we are going through today. American eugenics did not operate exclusively along racial lines. Poor whites, people with disabilities, immigrants, and institutionalized people were also targeted. But racial ideology became deeply intertwined with eugenics. The U.S. National Human Genome Research Institute notes that American eugenicists connected eugenics with fears of race suicide, immigration, and racial hierarchy, and that Black Americans, Native Americans, Latinos, people with disabilities and poor people were disproportionately affected. North Carolina, an especially important case of approximately 8,000 people sterilized through its eugenics program, nearly 5,000 were African Americans, according to historical research cited in medical literature. And there's another important historical dimension. Black women experienced coercive sterilization well into the 20th century, including procedures performed without fully informed consent. Now, there is also an article lurking around that even to 2006 to 2010, there were African Americans in California and Latino women who were sterilized against their consent, and that is in the 21st century. So we understand that this is not something that is new. It might still be going on. It just has not yet been unmasked. So the question, are Black lives being targeted, has a legitimate historical foundation, but it should be posed as a question about whether patterns of unequal treatment, reproductive coercion, or technological discrimination persist rather than presented as an already proven contemporary conspiracy. Now let us look at Germany, eugenics and Nazi Germany. The Nazi regime took eugenic thinking to an extraordinary destructive level. German racial hygienists developed theories about hereditary fitness, racial purity, and elimination of people considered biologically undesirable. Nazi policies included compulsory sterilization and eventually the murder of disabled people under the so-called T4 euthanasia program. The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum notes that eugenic and racial hygiene theories were widespread internationally before the Nazis came to power. This history is essential because it demonstrates something profoundly important. Now, something I found during my research also is that Hitler, actually the Nazis, they actually praised the United States and said that they got their ideas from the United States, particularly in the segregated South. So they know, so when we talk about Nazi Germany and that the US government was fighting against Nazi Germany, that is not the whole story. Part of the government might have been fighting, but you had major parts of mainstream media who were actually suggesting that some forms of people were actually inferior. And I have something here that I'd like to show you of a scientist who was being interviewed by Tony Brown, the journalist Tony Brown, the Black American journalist Tony Brown, those of you who remember him. And listen to what he's going to say here about African Americans. I just wanted to hear this, where did I put the Tony Brown? Right here. And he's going to be telling us what he thinks. And this wasn't in the 1970s, all right? So it's not far, long time ago.
A question, and Dr. Shockley, if you could answer it yes or no, I would appreciate it. Do you believe that black people are inferior in intelligence because of their heredity?
I have a standard statement. It is not yes or no. It's memorized. I say at the same time every time I think. What I say is this. My research leads me, and it's a tragic conclusion really, my research leads me inescapably to the opinion that the major cause of the American Negro's intellectual and social deficits is hereditary and racially genetic in origin, and thus not remediable to a major degree by practical improvements in environment.
All right, if you believe that the position relatively of black Americans to white Americans is based on a genetic inferiority, and I will accept the responsibility for that word, then what do you see as the solution to the problem?
Well, I see the first aspect of this is to prevent the problem from becoming worse by dysgenics. This first word
Would
that
you
I
translate
mentioned.
dysgenics for me and the audience?
Would
that be sterilization?
No. Dysgenics, you see, means what that other chart I showed you says.
Should blacks,
the least effective element.
Should blacks be sterilized?
No. I have a...
But if blacks are a problem and we do not allow...
This is inhumane. And
Dr.
I think one can find more humane solutions to this.
Well, then how would... Then
I would propose something in which one of the key clauses, phrases, is regardless of sex, race, or welfare status. And this is the proposal. I call it a thinking exercise. It's mentioned in that pamphlet that I showed that you can obtain. And and it goes this way, that you would offer a bonus to everyone to be sterilized. Now, we know we have a population explosion problem. We know that in India, that bonuses in the form of transistor radios are offered to people.
Would this bonus be directed to black people specifically, more than whites?
Mr. Brown, what did I say just a moment ago? I said, regardless of sex, race, or welfare status.
Now, there is a group.
That's what I say.
There is a group of white people to whom this offer should be made also.
Absolutely. Now, the offer is based upon the best estimates, best scientific estimates that one can have of any genetically carried disabilities. Now, there are some, I think, that any humane person would have no doubt about. And Dr. Welsing talked about dominant and recessive genes. I want to point out that sometimes a dominant gene can be a very bad thing, and it is a very bad thing for a neurological disease called Huntington's chorea, which is something like multiple sclerosis.
Which is more prominent in white people than black people.
That is correct. And I think that one should offer a large bonus for anyone who might be potentially carrying Huntington's chorea.
Dr. Shockley,
beyond this, it goes on with some other factors in this, but Dr. Welsing wishes to speak.
Are you aware that white people have more genetic diseases that affect their nervous system than people of color, than black people?
I wouldn't be at all surprised. And I think blacks apparently have higher heart problems.
Would you suggest that all of these white people who are carrying these defective genes, you know, whose families may carry these defective genes, that they be examined and it would be suggested to them that they be sterilized? Would you suggest this?
Yes, I think I would, probably, in general.
Now, one of the things that we have to note, this was done in the interview was done in 1974 in the United States by Tony Brown, the late Tony Brown. Has he died yet? I'm not sure if he's still around. Tony Brown, the journalist, is still around with us, still alive and well, and kicking. However, one of the differences that I want to look at between now and then is how people were frank and they were able to speak honestly about their feelings. Right now, we're living in a diplomatic age where people cannot no longer express freely. Now, when we can't express freely our ideologies, what's going to happen? It means, therefore, that our world is going to be easily conquered because you don't know what people believe. Because we are in this age now that we think we're so modern that we have to hide the ideologies behind agendas. But he's here speaking on public TV and he's letting it be known that black people are inferior, which is not true. But this is what he says his scientific research has led him to. And we must understand, as the late professor of Howard, she was asking him, but white people demonstrate and have genes, they have more diseases and are, genetically inferior in terms of weaker to black Americans. And he says, yes, he acknowledges that, but he's still sticking to his point that black people are inferior. So no matter what research you show these people, they are still going to be of the view that people of color, black people, are racially inferior. And that was the science. We cannot now just say that that was something that was a part of some, conspiracy movement. It was mainstream. It was a part of academia. That is what the science, just like during pandemic, we heard that the science said that the COVID vaccine was what we should take. Now, Maria is saying, thank you, Dr. Francis Cress Wessling. Yes, yes. Now, let's continue with our discussion as we go. Make sure you like the live and share it, because we need to have these conversations at this time, because very soon we are going to see we're already seeing lots of movements around, and they're calling for, the eradication of poverty, the eradication of crime and violence, and you have to be careful when they begin to talk like these. Now, when governments acquire the authority to determine which human beings are genetically, socially, or biologically valuable, the consequences can become catastrophic. And that is what we have to understand, that these policies don't just remain in labs and in academic circles, but they go toward to form policies that will govern human society. And one of the things that I find amazing now in our generation is that politicians are speaking about science as if they are authorities. Have you recognized that? That you will see in Congress people just talking away and they're calling terminologies, and many of them are not scientifically trained, but they are telling us that according to the science that they have heard, they're just projecting it and they are implementing them as policies. Now, eugenics is not equivalent to euthanasia. This distinction should be very clear on what I am trying to describe today. So we have eugenics concerns who should reproduce. The central question is who should be allowed or encouraged to have children. And we have historical eugenics included forced sterilization, marriage restrictions, racial classification, reproductive coercion, and selective breeding. Immigration restrictions based on supposed racial genetic inferiority. And we can see now that we're seeing, particularly among the conservatives, that they're telling us about immigration and what immigrants should be let in and those who should not be let in. That is also eugenics in a different name, and we have to watch what our governments are doing. Now, euthanasia concerns ending the life of a person, generally in discussions of severe illness, suffering, and medical ethics. The modern debate over euthanasia is principally about whether a competent person should be permitted under defined circumstances to request medical assistance in ending their life. But there is a crucial historical caveat. The Nazi euthanasia program was not equivalent to modern voluntary euthanasia. Now, the fact is, when we say voluntary, what do we mean? And who decides whether or not you should be killed? Nazi authorities used the word to disguise a state murder program targeting disabled and institutionalized people. That makes the historical connection worth discussing, but we should not collapse modern euthanasia laws into Nazi eugenics. Now, why does eugenics matter today? And that's what we're here for. Why is it that we need to discuss it in light of what we're seeing happening in our world? I don't think after the pandemic that we should not understand why this topic is of severe consequence and should be studied profoundly. This is probably the most important, part of the program. Modern science has developed technologies that the early eugenicists could scarcely have imagined. That's one of the first reasons we must understand. We have the technologies that we would not, people, those in those days in the Nazi Germany would be wondering if they had had those, they could have gotten rid of a large segment of the population. Now we have genetic screening, we have prenatal testing, we have IVF, we have embryo selection, there is gene editing, artificial intelligence, and we have genomic databases. These technologies can potentially save lives and prevent suffering, but they also raise a fundamental question: who decides which lives are desirable? That is the question that makes eugenics relevant again, and this is what we should ask. Could genetic screening eventually be used to select for particular reasons? And who decides what constitutes a defect? And how do they define a defect? Could economic inequality determine who has access to genetic enhancement? And could governments ever pressure particular populations to reproduce less? Could AI reproduce racial or socioeconomic biases hidden in historical data assets or databases? And what happens when technological capability moves faster than ethical safeguards? These are legitimate questions even without assuming a secret global program. And we have to come and ask these very hard questions. And where does Agenda 230 fit in all of this discussion? Because we have the 17 agendas that they have specified for the UN 30, the global agenda that will encompass us. By the way, those of you who are running to podcasts now to talk about what is happening locally in your country, that is not going to help you. You have to look at the global agenda, because that is what is going to be imposed on Barbados, on Jamaica, on Guyana. Not what Miss Mia Motley is doing, but what these centers of powers are doing. That is what you need to talk about every day, not the drama that exists in these domestic political theaters, because that's what they are. Domestic domestic political theaters. And it doesn't take any intellect to have any political commentary on those. I would handle this section, I'm trying to handle it very carefully because I understand that I don't want you to assert or to make assertions that are not true. So we have the UN's official 230 agenda contains 17 sustainable development goals and 169 targets, okay, including poverty reduction, health, education, gender equality, environmental sustainability, and inequality. Okay, there is no need to claim that the agenda calls for eugenics or population reduction. However, we must understand when they say that they want to eradicate poverty or they want to have gender equality, when we look at our societies now and we see the gap between the rich and the poor, and we see the social conditions that are happening as a result of that, do we really think they want to eradicate poverty? No. What they want to eradicate, I would argue, are certain people who are breeding poverty. So they want to eradicate people in very poverty-stricken areas. And that is one of the reasons why they carry out wars. And you see also lots of inter-community struggles and wars and gangs and all of that stuff, because it's all in the name of eugenics and population control. Now, the official documents do not say that. Instead, your stronger question: when global institutions establish population, health, environmental, and development objectives, how do we make certain that those objectives never override individual rights, national sovereignty, or reproductive freedom? And they always, as we're seeing, overriding national sovereignty, nationality, or health rights. In the vaccines, for example, they told us we had to take it because that is what the science says. So we have to look very carefully at Agenda 230 in light of the objectives and look at them through the lens of eugenics and possibly euthanasia. Now, at what point does legitimate population and development policy become coercive social engineering? Now, remember, we're telling you that what they're doing, they're using research, and lots of what is coming out of these research are really pseudoscience. Okay, but they are going to normalize them, saying that according to Harvard, according to Cambridge, according to Oxford University and the scientists there, this is what you must follow. Now, eugenics did not begin with Nazi Germany. That's what you need to understand. It did not begin there. In fact, I want to argue that eugenics started from slavery. The transatlantic slavery. You could not have wanted another, example of eugenics when you have persons who were suggesting that one race of people coming from a continent were significantly inferior to another. That was eugenics. In fact, when you read the history in the United States, you saw that the founding fathers and many of those other white intellectuals thought that black people would have disappeared overnight. They never thought that black people would have been there around so long. They thought eventually, because their genes were so weak, that they would have eventually disappeared from that country just by nature. They wouldn't have to do anything. That's what they thought. That's what they literally thought. It emerged from respectable scientific and academic circles in Britain, America, and Europe before eventually being transformed into some of the most horrific state policies of the 20th century. The lesson of eugenics is not that every modern genetic technology, medical policy, or UN initiative is eugenic. So that's what we want to establish that point. The lesson is that society must remain extraordinarily vigilant whenever governments, institutions, or experts acquire power to determine whose lives are valuable, whose reproduction is desirable, or whose existence is considered a burden. That is what we have to understand. Now, what happens when science stops asking how we can improve human life and begins asking which human beings should exist? And that is what eugenics asks. That's what they're asking. Which humans should exist? Because they're telling us that the population is we're overpopulated as a world, right? That is what they're actually telling us. But let us look at let us look at the definition of eugenics, and we're going to move on to some other discussions as we go in this very important live. So let me share my screen here with you and share this important video that this person here is describing. I think it's a very good understanding of eugenics. Let me put it on the screen.
Desirable traits and discouraging reproduction among those with undesirable ones. This movement gained traction in the early 20th century, particularly in the United States and Europe, and had a profound impact on history. In the United States, eugenics led to the implementation of forced sterilization laws in over 30 states, targeting individuals deemed unfit to reproduce. These laws were often based on flawed assumptions about heredity and the inheritability of traits like criminality, mental illness, and poverty. The infamous Supreme Court case, Buck v. Bell in 1927, upheld Virginia's sterilization law, with Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. declaring, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. This ruling set a precedent for other states to follow, resulting in the sterilization of tens of thousands of people. Eugenics also had a significant impact on immigration policies in the United States. The Immigration Act of 1924, influenced by eugenicist ideas, imposed strict quotas on immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe, Asia, and Africa, favoring immigrants from Northern and Western Europe who were considered genetically superior. This legislation aimed to preserve the racial purity of the American population. The eugenics movement reached its most extreme and horrific manifestation in Nazi Germany, where it was used to justify the extermination of Jews, Romani people, and other groups deemed inferior. The Nazis adopted eugenic principles to create a master Aryan race and implemented widespread forced sterilizations and euthanasia programs. In modern times, the legacy of eugenics continues to influence debates on reproductive rights, genetic engineering, and immigration. While the scientific community has largely discredited eugenics as pseudoscience, its historical impact remains a cautionary tale about the dangers of using genetics to justify discrimination and human rights abuses. Regarding Project 2025 and the Trump presidency, there have been criticisms that some of their rhetoric and policies echo eugenic ideas. For example, former President Donald Trump's anti-immigrant statements, such as referring to immigrants as poisoning the blood of our country, have been likened to eugenicist language that promotes the idea of genetic superiority and inferiority. Critics argue that such rhetoric dehumanizes immigrants and perpetuates harmful stereotypes. In conclusion, eugenics has left an indelible mark on history, shaping policies and attitudes toward race, immigration, and reproductive rights. Its legacy serves as a reminder of the importance of ethical considerations in scientific research. Stay woke, stay informed, and stay safe.
Right. So we have to understand
Eugenics,
that,
a term coined by British scientist Francis Galton in the...
So we have to understand that we have to look carefully at what is happening in our world, right? And when we see the policies coming through, let me see some of your good evening. Z, thank you, glad to be here. Yes, and thank you. And make sure you save that, you share the live. It's important. And try, people, to have some amount of attention span. You have limited attention span. You keep moving out and moving in. Show that you can think and focus on something and that is one of the reasons why the global elites are going to win the battle, because many of us we lack the attention span. We can't really focus on anything too long. We're running around and trying to look for entertainment. But this is not entertainment, by the way, all right? Nothing that is on this live is entertainment, or that I do on this program, as a matter of fact. They want us to believe that they abhor social Darwinism, but they practice it and allow it to permeate every conceivable facet of modern life. Absolutely. And one of the things I find absolutely ironical about the social Darwinism is the fact that without the natural selection, theory of Charles Darwin, this would not have happened. Because essentially what Darwin was saying is that human beings evolved, the entire world evolved, right? So it means that if we evolved and blacks started at the bottom and the whites eventually were at the top, then that is going to be the thing that is interpreted that way, that whites are inherently superior because they evolved and they are at the highest level of the evolutionary process. So that is what it is. The science is all about that. And many colleges and universities, including black people, believe in the theory of evolution. Now, how can you believe in the theory of evolution and say that black people are equal to white people? I don't understand that. You explain that to me. All the scientists on the line, if you are scientists here, you are scientifically oriented. Let me know, how is it that the theory of evolution can align with your idea that black people are not inferior? Because that is what the thing actually, implies. So true, Andrew. And then we have these thing again. Can I be real when Musk decides, because of his wealth, that he can launch 10,000 satellites in the sky that belongs to all 8 billion of us? He assumes superiority and is practicing eugenic beliefs. Absolutely, he's a eugenicist. Elon Musk is a eugenicist, and all of this AI thing that we're seeing here, he's literally saying now that AI and these technologies are superior to humans. So we're moving now into a technological understanding of eugenics, that technology, the robots, the humanized robots and all of these things are inherently, or maybe not inherently, but they are superior to human beings. And that is what we're going to hear very shortly. So maybe it's not now going to be racialized eugenics, but this will be a technological eugenics that is standing ahead of us. Is this Dr. Francis Cress Welsing? Yes, yes. So that is what we have to understand, people, that this is something that we have to pay significant attention to. Now, let us look at some other clippings, and we can always have our talk and dialogue, because we want to discuss this we want to get profoundly as to what is happening. Now, let us look at eugenics and medicine, right? Because that is also part of the whole, medicine and eugenics. We have to watch that too in our days.
We do that. 70% of the healthcare expenditures of this country are driven by chronic disease. And it is your patriotic duty, I'll say it again, the patriotic duty of all Americans to take care of themselves, because it's important for serving in the military, but it's also important because healthy people don't consume healthcare resources. The best way to reduce drug spending is to use less drugs because you don't need them because you're healthy. And it feels a lot better as well.
Yeah, so all of these things that they're coming up with, we can see in Congress, in our parliaments, these politicians are behaving as if they're scientists. Remember that the science and politics are also in bed. Just like we have religion and politics in bed, we have science and politics in bed. These two things should be separate. They can inform policy, but they must be debated among citizens for citizens to understand. But they're not doing that. What they're telling us is that the experts say. So the experts like Elon Musk and these billionaires are going to be the ones who will determine how we practice our medicine, how we practice our religion, and what we think of eugenics and euthanasia. We must understand that. So this is not something that we are going to stop. This is something that is in the making. This is something that the population is so distracted about what is happening on social media that they're not looking at the very heavy substantive topics like what I am discussing in tonight's program. Now let us look at eugenics, a little of the history. Eugenics is a controversial movement that emerged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, aimed at improving human genetic qualities through selective breeding. While the theoretical goal was to enhance the genetic health of populations, the actual practices associated with eugenics, particularly during its peak in the early 20s, have been widely criticized as scientifically unfounded and ethically troubling. Now, if you listen to scientists, what they will say, oh, that was not science, it was ethics. Well, that is the ethics of science, because the scientists were the ones who were actually debating it and said that that was the science. It's almost saying that the vaccines were not said by the scientists to be effective. Talk about the ethics of the vaccine during the pandemic. In the United States and other countries, eugenics policies often involved forced sterilizations and restrictive immigration laws targeting groups deemed genetically inferior, reflecting a profound misunderstanding of genetics and the role of environmental factors. So we see also intelligence. People will say that, okay, because you have more white people going to Harvard and more white people going to, Princeton, it's because that whites are inherently, of a higher intelligence than blacks. But that's not true. Because when you look at the typical white person in the United States, they have more money. So what do? They invest more in their children's education because they have the money. So having that money now, they're able to invest in tutoring, and they get tutoring for everything. Tutoring for math, tutoring for English, tutoring for just about anything that they need tutoring for. Now, if you have that environment, that rich environment of the parents working and making good money, and they're able to provide books and stimulation for them, then they are naturally going to do well. It does not mean, therefore, that they are superior to blacks. Because when black Caribbeans go to the United States, when you have black Africans who go to the United States, they perform even better or at the same level than their comparative or the white counterparts. So when we talk about that, we know that is not true. But many blacks in America, because of being socially indoctrinated for all these years, they believe that it is true. And even if they don't think it's true, they act as if it is true. And we have to be careful, because over time, we ourselves begin to internalize what these people are saying and accept it as the norm when it should not be the norm. For example, people are now questioning the role of vaccination. Not only COVID vaccination, but they're going back to history and looking at all of the flu shots, right? They're looking at the measles vaccine. They're looking at all vaccines, and they are wondering, was that really necessary? Did humans really have to be vaccinated at this sort of level? And what was the agenda? And I'm sorry to tell you that many scientists are agreeing that it was not necessary for all people. I'm not saying now for some it might have been necessary, but not for all people. And what the eugenicists do, they group us into this herd mentality, thinking that we're all the same. So all blacks are the same, all whites are the same, all Asians are the same. And that is not true. Are all Jamaicans the same? No. Are all Barbadians the same? No. We have differences in terms of our health, in terms of our intelligence, in terms of our talents. We are not all the same, and we can't be lumped into one group, which that is what America does. And many people do that, and then when you're saying the black race, and you group yourself like that too, they will use it and weaponize it against you, right? You see, the play on words they use, absolutely, that is what they do. They play with words, they play on words, and then we begin to think that they mean us well. So when they're saying the eradication of poverty, you say, wow, that is good. Okay, when they say the eradication of crime and violence, you will say that's good. When they say the eradication of a disease, you think that that is good. But when you look around, can we really eradicate all diseases? Not possible, right? Because diseases come in many forms, and the results, the causes of them vary from person to person. Wow, techno-eugenics, that is the new eugenics, the new form of eugenics that we'll be having in our century. That is now another leap. They skew the system in favor of them, correct? Because technically speaking, when you look at it, you can see that the AI, they are able to produce things faster than we humans can, right? So they can write an essay, they can write a letter much faster than humans can. They can analyze data, maybe with errors though, sometimes they're going to have errors, but they can do it faster than humans can. Not defending Kennedy, but he tried to get that point across, yes. But the other day he said something which was interesting though, Kennedy, and I'm going to say, since you said Stephen, I'm going to show that clipping of him, which suggests that he thinks so too, that we can be lumped into a group, and that is so. Where did he talk again? I had the clipping here with Kennedy. and eugenics medicine, and let me see on the rise. Where did I put that with him? Anyway, he was saying that black people do not have to be vaccinated at the same rate as white people. Now, how does he know that? Right? How do you lump an entire race of people and say that they're not, to be vaccinated, or they don't have to be vaccinated at the same rate as white people? No good, medical person will ever say that, because you have to deal with people at an individual level, even your family members. You can come from a biological family, and your family members have to be dealt with on an individual level as far as their health is concerned. Yes, you might have some family traits that people have, diabetes or genetically disposed to a disease, but it doesn't mean, therefore, that that family member is going to be genetically disposed to that disease. So we have to treat each person differently and separately, and not necessarily as a group that they're doing. When they do these things as group, you know that that is what they're leading to, eugenics. And we have to be careful. It looks good, but it's not really genuine. And remember, Andrew, to further your point, the tragedy of the Tuskegee syphilis study, right? And this is what they always, emphasize, the whole matter of this and the Tuskegee syphilis study. And they don't tell us of other things, such as immigration policies in the 1920s, where Italians and Polish and many of the Southern European citizens were forbidden from coming into the United States. Do you know that? Many white people, the Jews, the Polish, the Italians, and many of these Southern European people, Russians, were prohibited from entering the United States, including black people too, obviously. Because if you don't remember, it was in the 1960s that restriction was lifted, and many Caribbean people started going to the United States. Before, many of us could not go there. In the 1920s, from I think it was 1920, that law came into power, and up till 1965, I believe, when the restriction was actually removed, Caribbean blacks could not enter the United States that freely. That's why many of us started going after 1965 and onward. Now, I think Kennedy is a part of the plot too. Yes, he is. He is definitely a part of the plot. But he is garbed in a righteous man. He wears that garb of, yes, he's for the people and he's on their side, and they reveal a lot to him, and he knows how to write. In fact, sometimes I don't even know if he writes his own books, because the book on the vaccine, I think that could not have been written with the amount of information that he actually disposed right during the pandemic. I think that he was briefed and somebody helped him to write it, or it was a collective approach, and then people read it. I read it too. I found the book to be valuable, including today, but I think he just had a lot of information that I don't think the ordinary person would be exposed to. All right, so we have to be careful. Now, the movement gained traction through the adoption of ideas from social Darwinism and the statistical work of early eugenicists like Francis Galton, who sought to apply principles of heredity to societal issues. Now, one of the things we have to understand, when people tend to be what? To be confused and deceived when people put statistics beside something. So if they say to you 55% of blacks are predisposed to diabetes, you believe it. Wow, it's true. And then you think it's true, you do what they tell you to do. But remember now that Francis Galton was a brilliant statistician, right? He was a brilliant statistician, and he was a polymath. The man was brilliant. The man was brilliant, and he knew how to use numbers, and he went and he used numbers, and he actually deceived a lot of people, because what he would do, he would twist the numbers, and people would believe him because he was a statistician. And that is what we have to be careful about, looking at numbers. Nothing is wrong with numbers, don't get me wrong. For all of you who are statisticians out there, good work to you. Mathematicians, keep doing your good job. But it's when you twist the signs to what? To impose your own ideology. So please do not think I think anything is wrong with statistics or with mathematics. Thanks to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. for this law. Yes, yes, yes. But the fact is that it doesn't mean that the law is not returning. But what it's doing, Maria, is that it is evolving. So that is where we are going to be deceived, that laws don't necessarily, or movements, while they may go away for a while, right, it doesn't mean that they die. It just means that they might metamorphosize into, that's the word, into a different sort of movement. And that, I think, that is what is happening here with the eugenics movement. We have it in the agenda, the UN Agenda 2030. I think that's a real manifestation of the eugenics movement. Now, we have prominent figures in the movement, including scientists and social theorists, who believe that societal improvement could be achieved by controlling reproduction. However, the eugenics movement ultimately faced a downfall, particularly after its ideologies were infamously adopted by the Nazi regime, leading to horrific human rights abuses during the Holocaust. Now, let's get to our Caribbean, because we have to link it to what is happening in the Caribbean. Have you noticed that in Barbados and countries like Jamaica, and I'm not sure about Trinidad, but they're telling us that our population is not growing as it ought to be growing? Are you aware of that? Are they telling you that in Barbados, and I'm not sure in other parts of the Caribbean region, that our population is not growing and they are concerned? In Barbados, for example, I understand that Miss Mia Motley wants to send in a lot of Africans to perhaps breed up the population. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is that we also have to watch what they're telling us. Because why is it now that they're so concerned? For example, the Jamaican population has not grown greatly since independence. And for a long time, it's 2.7 million people, 2.8, some say 3 million people. And that has been from when I was growing up. So the fact of the matter is that I don't really understand what is this agenda for us when they're telling us that the population is not growing and we have to do things to improve the population or for the population to grow. Do they really want the population to grow? That is the question that I'm trying to ask and to get your responses to. And given that the Caribbean has a long history of oppression, do you think it will be one of the first places the eugenics movement will target? I think so. And that's what we're saying, that here in the Caribbean too, we are distracted and we're not so much, we don't focus on these things, right? We think this is a US problem. We think it's a European problem. We don't really think that these issues affect us. So yes, we are more targeted than they are. And secondly, we have a lot of people of color that live in our society. So we are always the experimental labs for all of these experiments. That is, we are often used, and that is what we have to understand. So you're on point, ZE, that they are practicing and they are actually moving along in our region. This, what I have heard, they say that the Barbados gene pool is stagnant, and they're telling us that in Jamaica too, and that they have to do something to rev up the population. At the same time, crime is taking out the population, poverty is also in Jamaica is taking out the population. So what are they really doing about that? But they're telling us that they have to do something to improve on the population. Now, I do not believe that because a lot of us have babies and head back and forth from the United States of the other European countries. Yes, but it seems to me that they're telling us that the population is not growing and they want the population to grow, and yet still we're not seeing where they are implementing mechanisms to have the population to grow. They're not doing that. Okay, so that is what it is all about. Let's see if we can look at some other of the clippings that since I've had them, it doesn't seem like you guys are interested in the lives at all. Maybe I still have to stop the lives too and just give you the videos, the pre-recorded videos. You're wasting my time a lot when I come on these lives. Then we have the Henry Gates. Look at this, the DNA testing. Yeah, I think I will stop the lives as of tonight and move on to, and tomorrow we start. As of tomorrow, we'll just do pre-recorded from here.
Are fake.
When
It's a
Oprah was
front
finally
for
in
eugenics.
the first series, and we gave her a DNA test, basically the next day she went to South Africa to announce that she was opening what became the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy. She was in an auditorium like 75,000 people or something, and she announced that she just had the test and that she was Zulu. So it broke on CNN. I was sitting in my living room minding my own business and said, Oprah Winfrey's a Zulu. So I called Rick Kittles. And I said, Rick, did you tell Oprah she was a Zulu? He goes, no, man. She made that up herself. It's a true story. It's a true story. I would lie to make you laugh, but I'm telling you a true story. So I said, Rick, are you in your lab? He said, yeah. I said, is anybody there? He said, no. I said, when the results come in, make her Zulu, man. You know? I said, you back there making it up anyway. Nobody believe you could take some spit and figure out a tribe? What, are you crazy?
Okay, yeah, so what he's saying here is that literally the DNA test, and from the 2010, when these DNA tests were they were popularizing them, I knew that there was some agenda with these DNA tests and testing that they're doing. And I think that these DNA tests were really to collect information about you rather than to connect you with your real ancestors or what people are trying to look for. Some of them might do some of that, but I think, as he's suggesting, most of them do not. It's false, right? It's false, because no DNA test is going to really tell you really what happened years, centuries ago. It's just not going to happen. But the fact of the matter is that they believe, and some people believe it as it's the Gospel of John, and then they take it seriously, and then when they go to other cultures, they realize that they might not be recognized as such. I have heard that some CARICOM states may be adopting the pay-to-have-children approach used in some Asian states. I am sure that that is going to happen. It might be the same thing that Ms. Miyamaki is doing in Barbados, because the people who are moving there, the Africans who are moving there, can't be poor Africans. They have to be Africans who are disposed to a certain amount of income and have some money, who are willing to travel and to invest in living in Barbados. Barbados is very expensive, I understand, to live in. So it means, therefore, that these Africans are not coming there because they're necessarily looking for opportunities. They're coming there to live and perhaps to invest. Notice that these major DNA companies are no longer in business, right? Because they have already collected people's information, which can be used against them. So if you, and I think, even though you're saying, Stephen, that they are out of business now, I think that in the future, we might have to be, we might be committed to take DNA tests. Why? Because they are going to want to say, well, you are of Senegalese background, or you have that trait, so you have to be able to take this vaccine or whatever, because it is money making. It is money making. It has nothing to do with wanting you to connect with your ancestors. And who owns my DNA information when I give it to find my ancestor site? What becomes of that information that came from me? And this is a question nobody's asking. Right? And that's why we should not be willing to give them our information, because information is always being used against us. Right? So why give them information? And you might think that it is innocent and, oh, who can do anything to you? It's the same way that if you have friends, you don't give all your personal information to friends, because these friends, so-called friends, can use that information against you. It's not just that you have anything to hide, but it's that it is not the wise thing to do, because they can weaponize your information. And when you think it might not harm you, yes, you might not have lied, you might not have done anything, but people tend to use information against you, and that is why you have to be careful of sharing information, particularly on the World Wide Web. And if I'm not mistaken, didn't Barbados have a lab at some point in time? Wow. You mean a genetic lab? A genetic lab, Stephen? I'm not sure about that, but that could be possible. We can't put anything, you can't put anything, these people are qualified to do just about anything. Now, eugenics is the idea that human populations should be improved through social policies, right? So they want to improve social policies such as selective breeding, encouraging people with desirable traits to have children while discouraging those with undesirable traits. It's a coercive ideology. It involves people in positions of power making value judgments about which traits are desirable or not, and so who is deserving of reproduction or not, and it inevitably leads to human rights abuses. Now, in Trump's, when Trump was coming back to office, during his campaign, that is, he kept on talking about good genes and bad immigrants and good immigrants. That is some of the things that people are concerned about, and things that were mentioned in Project 2025. People are concerned that this is, again, the resurgence of the eugenics movement. But he does not say that. They're not going to use the word eugenics to you. They use it so cunningly that you think that what they want to do is to improve on the quality of the country. But when they're trying to block some immigrants, that is exactly what they're trying to do. And he's talking about those who are productive and those who are unproductive. Right? We have to watch these people's words. Now, Trump, might not be aware of the agenda, but we, the citizens, have to be aware, because the consequences will follow us, will meet us somewhere. I heard that too, Stephen. He's saying that labs in Barbados, and Stephen is saying, unfortunately, Andrew, a lot of people play it into it and gave their DNA samples through the mail. We did. Because people were eager, and nothing is wrong to be curious in terms of where you originated from. But again, remember now that it is these sort of innocent agendas and what they say that eventually lead into harm. The pandemic started out by a virus, and they wanted to get rid of the virus. They want to protect us, and we saw what happened, the consequences of all that took place after the pandemic. We must begin, but our people have not gotten smarter. And one of the things that's going to happen again, as another, not necessarily the pandemic, but something else is going to happen, and we are going to fall for the same trap, because human beings never learn. Intriguingly, the guy who first pointed out Jason Arday believes, right, he does. I think it's Coffney, in the genetic superiority of Caucasians, he calls himself a race realist. Absolutely. I'm happy that you came up with this point, Z, because that is also a point we should have raised and that's why I'm raising it now, during our conversation about Jason Arday. That it is the resurgence of the eugenics movement. But it's on both sides. Even the DEI movement is a eugenicist agenda. Why? Because the progressives, the Democrats, the Labour Party in Great Britain, what they're essentially saying is that black people are not intelligent as white people. So we have to be sorry for them and give them a job that would have been taken by a white person, but because they are not genetically disposed to intelligence, then we have to give them a position and say it's a token position, but it's not a position that we would have given to another black person. Okay, so that is because when we listen to what is happening in Great Britain, only 1% of the population in Great Britain are black professors. Black professors make up only 1% of the British academic, teaching staff. Okay, so it means therefore that very few black intellectuals, well, not few intellectuals, but very few professors, black professors, are actually in England. I think he was dismissed from the university for those beliefs. Yeah, there are more reasons, right? There's a myriad of reasons for which he was actually asked to leave. DEI was one of them. Eugenics, as you're saying, the eugenics movement. So both parties, both conservatives and progressives, believe in the inferiority of black people. Okay? One suggests that we are inferior and we should never occupy any space in society. The other says, okay, let's give them a few positions, a few token positions, and let them people know that, we gave it to them because we're sorry for them and we want them to, to see themselves as somebody. And that's exactly what they did to Jason Arday and to some of our black intellectuals. Yes, I heard this last night. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, it is so true. And thank Z for bringing it up, because that is so true. We've discussed Jason Arday, and we have to look at the genesis, the eugenics movement, and how that might have contributed to his unsudden death. Well, his sudden death, not unsudden, but sudden death. Seriously though, you people are doing a good enough job doing yourselves in without any help from the white man. Now, what do you mean that we are doing ourselves a good without any help? We don't need any help from any white man, okay? Do you need our help? And then we have, and that 1% is by design. Yes, it is by design. It is by design. But it's not that you don't have enough black intellectuals in what you call it now, in Great Britain. You do have enough black intellectuals. But the fact of the matter is that they want it to remain that, and then they take a token few and say that they are trying to improve on the living conditions of black people. What they're doing is nonsense. And this is now where you and I are going to fall into that trap. Jason Arday believed that he was going to be used to stimulate the black community, the poor blacks who would see him as a role model. But essentially what they were doing to him, they were using him, and then after they had gained what they wanted from him, they spat him out of their mouth. Because what did they do? They got him to be on the staff. So whatever money that the government gave to Cambridge, because I'm sure they got money for the DEI program. Also the book that he launched and that the publisher got millions of dollars, or will get millions of dollars from. It means therefore that they used him. And they used many of us, even including Barack Obama. They're all used. And I'm not suggesting that Barack Obama was a DEI, because he is coming from the system and he was trained by the system. So he's not. He is even more qualified than many of the so-called white people. However, they gave Barack Obama to the black community to say that, okay, this is our token gift to you, but don't expect anything more from us. And when we kick you, don't say anything, because we actually placed one of you in the Oval Office. And that is exactly what they did during the Barack Obama era. I see what you mean, Andrew, but I also saw it from the other side, that the system was so structured to facilitate black failure that DEI was created as a safeguard. But I see what you mean. No, it was not a safeguard. It's what they're telling you that. And from a surface level perspective, yes, it looks like that. And I'm not suggesting too that maybe one or two people might use it and use it for good intentions. So let me be clear on that too. There are people in the system who might not be for the real agenda, and they're using it as a way of bridging the gap. And nothing is wrong with that. All right, because there are good people around. Okay, we don't want to demonize everybody and say that everybody is wicked and evil, right? So I'm sure that there are some people within that DEI system who believe that black people are not represented in the way they should, and they want one or two black people on their staff. Nothing is wrong with that, and I support that. But when you look at the elite universities, you know that they are in bed with the elites, and they are in bed with some very dangerous programs, such as the eugenics program. Remember now that the eugenics movement did not come out of ordinary universities. It came out of the top universities among the elite scientists of the time. All right, so the same thing will happen in our generation. Now, look, England and Europe are scared that their population is decreasing, and there are too many black and brown people inhabiting their land. Yes, and the same thing is happening in America too. The same thing is happening in America too. It does not mean too that some of the gene pool, like some of the people, not only black people, but other peoples, including poor whites, right, and poor Latinos and Asians, could not also be targeted. But we are the most targeted, okay? For some reason, we are always the most targeted. Because even though they targeted Italians and Polish and Jews and other groups in the United States during the eugenics movement there in the 1920s, but you saw that they were able to be resurrected, and the United States gave them more opportunities and remove the restrictions eventually, right? But with black people, it remains. And that hatred still remains. And the Jews and the Italians and the Polish and the Russians were able to form the white American population, and they united against us. So even though Italians back in the days were considered to be like a more terrible, you know what the whites would say? That they were worse than the Negroes. That is how they described the Italians in America, that their traits and their genes were worse than the American Negro. Right? And look at what they have done to them now. They have them, toe to toe with the white race. So we have to understand that we are the most targeted of all the race. My opinion. Yes, and true, and we have there true, and what more of us should move there. Right, correct. And overwhelm their system. That's what they think, that we're overwhelming their system. But you know what? You mean that after everything, slavery, civil rights, etc., we still have to fight this battle. Well, we did not really get civil rights in the way that people say we got it. Remember, we said that after the civil rights movement, what we saw afterwards was the laws that came in the 1990s, not 1980s rather, particular under Reagan, that saw more blacks going into prison and the destruction of the black family. So what they always do, remember now, let's go back to the United States and even the Caribbean. You get emancipation, they emancipate you, then what do? What do you get? Nothing. Right? Then they're going to implement laws like vagrancy laws and laws that will put you into prison. You have no land, you have nothing to move on. So they've created poverty. And then when people have no means of taking care of themselves, they find themselves involved in illegal, illicit activities, and then we find ourselves in problem with the law. And then they put you into prison and say, well, look at them, they're just fit for prison. Because remember now that after emancipation, particularly in the United States, they said that blacks could not work. They didn't have the ability to educate themselves and to work and to become productive citizens. That was the sort of ideology. Emancipation did not just come because white people wanted to see blacks free. Some of them did, a few of them did. But the leaders, like the Abraham Lincolns and these people, still thought that blacks were inferior. And he was wondering how in the Dickens are we going to have these people roaming around with the white people there? And he wanted them out. Remember, Abraham Lincoln was trying to work with black activists, such as the same guy there, Frederick Douglass, among others, to have African Americans leave America. Right? Because, he thought that they could not live with white people. They were too inferior to be able to interact with white people. These people don't seem to understand every time you invade Africa, these people are going to flee and they're going to Europe, England, or right. Absolutely. And this is what happened too in the Middle East. So I see, for example, Europeans like the British are complaining, and the Germans, where are these Muslims coming from? Well, you went there, right, and you destroyed their country, and they have to go to somewhere. So if you had not gone and troubled them, they would not have been immigrating to your country at the rate in which they are immigrating. The same thing happens in the Central America and South America and the Caribbean. The United States goes there, and it also creates this socioeconomic disaster. And many people, including Haiti, and many people move to the United States, not because they want to move there, but because they were forced, because the circumstances that the U.S. and its policies created caused them to move into that sort of situation. And they have to move. They have to go somewhere that they can live. Yeah, I agree. We will still go to fight this battle. Take note that some of these cases that's coming through the courts and some of these mysterious hanging on black people, and they're calling it suicide. Right. And by the way, many black Americans, particularly black females, talk about the sort of difference in treatment of their when they go to hospitals, and especially when they go to have their children, that they're treated crudely. And sometimes they're saying that black women can experience or tolerate more pain than a white woman. So when they should give her like a painkiller or something, they refuse to give her because they suggest that even today that black people can tolerate more pain than their white counterparts, their so-called white counterparts, when that is not true. That has nothing to do with science. Some might be able, but not all. Just like some white people might be able to tolerate more than blacks, but not all. And that's why we cannot, describe people by a group. We have to look at them individually. And a lot of people are not aware that the Caribbean is the second opium war experiment through cannabis. England got China addicted to opium to get back their silver. The tricks these people do. Absolutely. And this is well said, and is something that we have to be constantly aware of. But what is happening in the Caribbean is that we're so much, our eyes are on Mia Motley, our eyes are on Andrew Holness, our eyes are on these people and the opposition, that we cannot see that they are not the ones controlling the levers of power and the agenda that will be imposed and are being imposed right now as we speak on the Caribbean. So that's why we have to speak about these issues and not just what is happening with the government and opposition, because that is just theater. And I know people love it, but that is not going to solve the problem in Barbados or in Jamaica. That's it. For every action, there is an opposite and equal reaction. They still do not get it. Absolutely. They won't get it. But whatever is happening in Europe, they also benefit from it, Because what happens is that we, the people, are the ones going to what? To be fighting against each other. When we fight against each other and your neighbor, you and I are not the enemies, Our enemies are in the parliament and in like Wall Street and these places. Their lives are enemies. All right. So people now begin to move away from the enemy, the real enemy, and they go attacking their neighbors. And when they attack their neighbors now, the problem is never solved, because the neighbor in the first place is not the root of the problem. Might benefit to some extent. Some might benefit, but they're not the real cause of the problems that we are facing. Okay, so when we look, for example, at our politicians in the Caribbean, we think that they are the main cause of the problems we're facing, but they aren't, right? They're just engineering, the programs and the policies that have been sent to them from Washington and from wherever power centers of the world. Okay, but we see what we see, and we think we see what we get, and if I can just get Mia Motley out of the parliament, everything in Barbados is going to be okay, and that is delusional thinking. It's not going to happen, right? Because she is not the one who controls what is happening in Barbados. She's just there managing. She's the manager of that corporation, but she is not the CEO. Right? The CEO is right there in Washington, D.C., and they are the ones who run this show, right? And that's what we have to understand. That's why we have to look carefully at what is happening in these countries to see how we can make sense of what is happening right within the region. Now, the first eugenics sterilization law was put in place in the U.S. state of Indiana in 1907, which made legal the sterilization of those who were deemed undesirable without their consent. By the way, when you look at ICE, the immigration, authorities right there now in the Trump administration, do you not see that the way in which they're treating immigrants and the brutal way in which they treat them, that this is almost like a reflection and a resurgence, a reincarnation of the eugenics movement? Yes, it is. The way in which they're treated, and some people, some immigrants. The brutal way in which they're treated. In fact, I've seen images of black people, black American citizens who are surveilled and targeted and beaten and even when they're saying, I am an American citizen, I am not an immigrant, they still beat them, right? Under the Trump administration. So blackness in America right now is targeted Because you might look like a Haitian, and they're saying, well, we have to get you out here, even though you are native-born American black citizen. So that is happening, and this is things that we call eugenics. So immigration is the reincarnation of the eugenics movement. Now, Lord Andrew, that is blasphemous. And then we have these saying, brilliant point, Andrew, that is being seen now in South Africa, right, where the black are chasing out their black brothers and sisters, but wouldn't dare touch the whites who enslaved them and stole their gold. Right. And this is a very important point. When we think that we're all one as a race, it's nice to think that way. It's nice to feel comfortable and secured that because somebody looks like you, they represent you. But it doesn't. They don't necessarily represent you. All right? They don't necessarily represent you, because the same black police in America can also target you as another black person, and they will whip you just and even more so than a white police officer. Do you remember the secret police force Obama was talking about when he ran for Absolutely. 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 Now, these are the things we're talking about. That all of these police secret forces and the unification of the military and the police force, they are a reincarnation of these Nazi sort of approach. We can see the Nazification of the United States under Trump. All right, and that's why we have to talk about these movements, because it's not that they're going to come and tell you that it's just eugenics, right? It's just that they are going to implement policies that really are the reincarnation of eugenics, and then you are going to be afraid and wondering what you need to do when the signs were there, but you were not reading them carefully and you did not see them. And the black South African politicians are facilitating the agenda. Absolutely. Absolutely. Remember, we on Sunday, we looked at a video clip of this Pan-Africanist, right? His name is Maponga, and he was suggesting that when Gaddafi was unalived, the South African presidents and a lot of the African presidents knew what the agenda was. They knew, they were informed, and they did not tell him, right? They did not tell him, okay? Because they were on board with it, and had they told him, it could destroy their career, okay? So it doesn't mean that if Miss Mia Motley hears about an agenda that she's going to tell you. She's not going to tell you, right? If they're going to sterilize the women in Barbados, they will do what they want to do. And under the Obama administration, the police became militarized. I think it was before. I think it started under Bill Clinton, and it morphed into, because when you have where was it again? The Waco, Texas. The Waco, Texas, that was the first enactment of the joint military, police force against these people who they deemed were some religious cult. Remember that thing in Waco of 1995 or 1994? That was the first thing of that the United States was moving into that era. Andrew, if Trump loses the election, do you think Democrats will continue his agenda? Please share your thoughts on this. Yes, because it's not necessarily his agenda. It's the agenda of the empire, right? So whatever we call in America, we call it the COG, the continuity of government. The continuity of government, and that was signed into law, I think, after 9/11. So whatever government comes into power, the COG will always remain in effect. In fact, do you notice that every time when an outgoing president is going out, when he's leaving office, before the new president is inaugurated, the incoming president will meet him, maybe like in December, right? They meet, and what they do there is that the outgoing president gives to the incoming president his or her agenda. In the case of the United States, it's his, because we've never had a female president, but will give the agenda to him, the president, of what he needs to do, what his project need to be. So as far as we're concerned, we know that Trump's project was what? the immigration, right? This new immigration laws and all of that, ICE and all, that was his new project. Because all of them are part of the same agenda, even though they might manifest it in different ways. In the same way, for example, we're saying that a racist can be reflected both on the conservative end and on the left-wing end. The conservatives will say that you should not talk about racism and slavery because that ended years ago, right? The conservatives, the liberals now, or the left-wing people will say, yes, we should have it, talk about it every time, all the time. But what they do, they talk about it in this victimization where we look like we have no agency, where victims and some white liberals are coming at our rescue. Do you understand what I mean? So both of them are essentially racist, but they manifest it in different ways. But both have the same agenda, and that is to sort of tell black people that they're inferior and to show them that they cannot, ever be at the same level of white people. And if Trump loses the election, okay, I think I read this already, yes. So I think that he will continue. That's a short answer. Yeah, not Biden, anybody who comes in, Kamala Harris, any of them will do. Even if you should go there, you're forced to do that agenda. They're more worried about their career and money. Yes, and it's agenda. It's a club. It's a club, and we have to understand. Yes. Oh, yes. I forgot about Waco. Yeah, that was the first time. It was under Clinton, and that was the time that they were telling Americans that they should, if things affect them, the police and the military can be, combined effort can really come and take you down, and that's what they did. And they didn't have to do it. You know why? Because they would pass the same guy there, jogging every morning, the same guy who was a part of the club, the cult, and they could have apprehended him without having to do what they did. But they sought to send the American populace a message that if you ever challenge the government, because that guy was challenging the government, and he had a separatist movement. What if black people were to say, we want a separate part of the United States to organize ourselves, to have a separate economy, to have a separate military, to have a separate education system? The government would treat people the same way as they treated the people at Waco, right? But people argued and said, there were some cult people of some cult, there were some religious people, whatever they were. I'm not saying now that the government should not have intervened, because we were hearing things about what they were doing to little children. And some of these things could have been true. So I'm not suggesting here that the government should not be held accountable for protecting citizens who could have been a part of that cult, right? What I'm saying is that the government could have done it a different way, because they could have apprehended the guy who was the leader long before they went there with the military and the police, and they slaughtered a lot of people, including children. All right? So it was a very sad situation there in Waco. Look at this, only 10 people on the live after an hour and 21 minutes. So wasted my time. I shouldn't say that, because you guys did very well. But you guys have to do better in terms of the lives. Or do we want live, or just we want, what do you call it now, pre-recorded videos? Do we want just pre-recorded videos? So we can just send it off. I did also, publish a video today about is YouTube losing its credibility? Please go and watch that video and also give it a like so you can go on the platform, watch it to the end. 10-minute video about is YouTube losing its credibility, because it seems to me that something is happening on this platform and I don't know what the problem is, but it is weird. And look at this, it is testament that something is going. So should we move forward to having just pre-recorded video? It doesn't seem like we are interacting as much with the lives as I would like to, and this requires a lot of energy, a lot of preparation, so it's probably better for me to do the pre-recorded better. Saves much more energy than doing these lives. What do you think? All right, so I think, let me see. Yes, let me see. There we have, yes, Andrew, that's true. There is always a meeting, right? There's always some meeting. Yes, the Democrats are not going to change anything. They are more they're more covert. They are more covert, and they're the ones who we have to watch, because at least the Republicans show us their true colors, but the Democrats are covert, as Stephen is saying, and we don't know necessarily sometimes. Their agendas are often hidden. I'm hearing people rejoicing over Mandami. He and Trump met too, and after their meeting, Trump praised him. That's when I started smelling a huge NY sewer rat. I have never trusted him, because anybody who comes out of New York, and he's going to be tied to monies which are not necessarily clean, because New York is a very corrupt state. It's New York, right? And all of the organized crime and all of that stuff. We know New York. Just go and read Whitney Webb's book, right? Whitney Webb's book on the One Nation Under Blackmail. I think she did a very good job of linking a lot of these states, particularly New York, Chicago, these areas, to organized crime, right? And the mafia. So we must understand that, when they are going to be in power, the mafia, the organized crime, the criminal people, the crime people, they have to act with the mob, right? The mob controls, and if the politician does not do what they tell them to do, it can be a problem. So the mobs always send their money to the politician. They support them to get into office so that they can be able to protect them, one, because the mobs have to be protected, and so that they can continue with what they do. So I don't think Mamdani or any of these people that come out of New York are necessarily good people, right? Yes, they are censoring people. Yeah, they are definitely censoring people, and this is what I have never seen the censorship since I've been on the platform until how many months now? 5 months. 5 months. I would see it now and again, and you'd work with it, but it became unbearable. And do you know that they have cut me off in terms of I can't send a message to them? They've cut me off the button in my YouTube studio. You can't send a message to them, because if you challenge them, they don't want to be challenged. And the more you challenge YouTube, is the more they send, they tell you that they're going to sanction you, and which means that they're going to cut your live, they're going to suppress the live, they're not going to send out notification, because they don't like to be challenged. It's an autocratic institution. I enjoy the lives, but I understand and empathize with you. Yes, it has to be that people are coming, because at the same time we have to pay the bills, and I have to be able to research and do things, and I just can't come and waste my energy just talking to. Well, I shouldn't say that, because the people. If you could just have some attention span, but not you, but the people on the platform, you just lack the attention span. You're moving here, moving there, and then the algorithm is messing up the algorithm. Why don't you stay and stick to a live? Yeah, yes, I had no idea that the mafia had the whole eastern part of the US and Canada under their control. I was reading about Montreal 76, and the corruption was unbelievable. And I think, as I'm saying, that Whitney Webb's book is very useful in that sense. Really, she really went into its deep, right? And she is very thorough as far as connecting the dots between the politicians and the mob, right, and the criminal network. And we realize that the United States government is not clean. No government at all is clean. Okay, and I really wonder why we think governments would be clean when the Western world came out of slavery. Remember, the Western world was built on the backs of our ancestors. So how do we think that the government of the Western world is ever clean, when the monies and all these institutions, whether the Harvards or the Wall Streets, all of these monies and wealth came out of slavery? And we know that slavery, is actually reincarnated with the drug trade, with the mafia, mob rule, where they're using people like in the Caribbean as mules, drug mules. All of this is the reincarnation of slavery. Okay, so slavery did not die really; it just came under different circumstances. Okay, so a new name. So we have to watch these developments as we are seeing them. Okay, so any other response? I think that this was something. Let me just give you a few clippings, since we have more clippings. I won't waste my time. It's almost like I'm wasting the research I have done with you, because a lot of the things I do here, I have to bring them home, because the intellect is not here in the Caribbean that I would like to see. The level of discussion is so weak that I'm just wasting my time. But let's look at this, eugenics and the the beauty movement, our concept of beauty, that is also eugenics. Look at what this
Pseudoscience,
guy is
it was a
saying.
political weapon. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, eugenics claimed that humankind could be improved by ranking according to race, traits, and intelligence. We see how Europeans placed themselves at the top and labeled black people as biologically inferior. What that does is it creates an inferiority complex, right? That has carried on to this day, that has also influenced beauty standards. Measurement of skulls, skin color, and facial features were presented as evidence that inequality was natural and not constructed. This is how internalized inferiority formed, right? And we see how beauty standards began favoring lighter skin, straighter hair, and European features, right? We also see how intelligence is often linked to whiteness. All these things have carried on from the 19th and the 20th century. It hasn't stopped because I see it in my community. I see it with my people. Eugenics, of course, was also used during the apartheid era to justify why blacks should be servants, why we should be laborers, because we are incapable of doing certain things, because we are black and biologically inferior. But getting deep into the beauty standards, right? I also see how it's affected the colored community. And I'll speak on that a bit now. I remember during the whole open chats saga, right? Obviously what they said on the podcast, which of course I don't stand with. It was disrespectful. I wouldn't be happy about that being said about my race. But I remember how a lot of colored people reacted to that. The videos a lot of colored people were making, saying, at least my hair is straight. At least our eyes are green. At least our eyes are blue. And I'm sitting there like, but my colored buddy sitting right next to me has a brush cut, skin is almost as dark as mine. Where's his straight hair? Where are his blue eyes and his green eyes? Or does that make him less of a colored? These ideas or these beliefs that we've been indoctrinated with to see whiteness as the standard of everything holy, good, beautiful are affecting us big time. Because what about the coloreds who don't have straight hair? Coloreds who have nappy hair like me, who have coarse hair like me, who don't have blue eyes, the coloreds who don't have green eyes, what about them? Are they less of coloreds because they don't possess those features like you do? And another thing about the colored race, guys, the colored race is the most diverse race in this country. They're a mix masala. So of course you'll get coloreds over here who are more light, coloreds over there who are more dark, coloreds over here who have broad noses, those who have narrow noses, those who have just brown eyes, those who have blue eyes, those who have straight hair, those who have cruzada. It's all different. But when you guys make whiteness the standard of everything good and beautiful, of course you look down on your brother because he doesn't look like you, he doesn't look white. That's nothing to be proud of. And I feel like that's something the black and colored community have to sit down and have a conversation about. We are beautiful just the way we are. And this just goes to show that even after eugenics has been scientifically debunked, its psychological damage still remains. It still remains. We need to let go of these ideas that teach us that being black is a curse, being black means you're uneducated, being black means you can't think. We need to free ourselves from this way of thinking.
Now, when we talk about the whole matter of beauty standards, right? We still talk about the hair, the texture of the hair and the shape of the nose and all of these things. And even black females' voluptuous body, right? People talk about that they're too fat or, I'm not saying now that women should be overweight and all of that stuff. But, in some cases, the way how black women's bodies are shaped is different from how European bodies are shaped, right? So, and people still comment on that, expecting that the black female is going to have the same body type as European women do, right? And these are things that we are getting also from eugenics in terms of what is the standard of beauty and how should a female look, or vice versa. And even male hair also is frowned upon if it's too kinky. All of these things are coming out of the eugenics movement because that is how, and it's still here in the Caribbean. right? It's still here in the Caribbean. I remember I was talking to a friend of mine who studied in Cuba, and she was saying, and she's way lighter than I am, but she's definitely of African descent. And she said to me that when she went to Cuba, they kept on asking her that she needs to marry to a white man because that is how she's going to improve on her race, right? These are Cubans who we think, by the way, the Cubans are well educated, as people say they have a good education system, but do they? Do they, when a lot of them think like that even today? So that is where we have to understand that the eugenics movement is still alive and well. It only is reflected in a different manner, right? Not in the way that it was in the early 20th century. In the 21st century, it's manifesting through techno-eugenics. So we have now the whole matter of the technology that they are designing and how they are going to use them against us, saying that technologies are superior to human abilities and intelligence. So I'm sure this AI, the ChatGPT, and all these things are going to be used against you, that you cannot do the job that an AI can do. So they have to replace you. Humans don't have that intelligence, and we will never have that form of intelligence. So this is where we are now. Are we going to accept it? I think we are, because the people in the Caribbean are grossly uneducated, and as a result of that, it is going to be what it is, and people will just have to deal with it as it comes. You dealt with the pandemic, and some of you had to be unalived, and I think that you will deal with it. Only that this is going to be on a much grander scale, that people are going to be disappeared, unalived, and poverty is going to be reigning supreme, because people will lose their jobs eventually, because AI is going to take over, and it is what it is. Okay, so any other questions, any other comments before we go? Yeah, in Cuba, yes. Wow, that almost sounds like the blancamiento, right? That is the blancamiento. And the blancamiento is actually blanquecimiento. Yeah, the blancamiento is what is in Brazil, right? That's a Portuguese word. Do you speak Portuguese, Z? Você fala português? Clive, Mr. Dr. Anson, yes, very interesting topic, Mr. Tucker. Continue the great work. Thank you so much. Yeah, so that is the blancamiento. The blancamiento is what is in Brazil, yeah, and the blanquecimiento is the Spanish word for whitening of the population. So yes, that is what. Any other question? Oh, but yeah, you don't speak Portuguese, but your blancamiento is spelled correctly. So it's only like you say, because the branco or branca is white in Portuguese. So the branquemiento, the branquemiento is the brancamento, is the standard word for it. Then we have I wish. I wish. Any other comment before we go? Any other comment about the racial disparities amongst us? Let me just show some more clippings and we can go before we go. Because I don't want to waste what I saved on my thing. I think we had looked at enforced sterilization in the 70s. Look at this, that, these things were happening in the 70s, and we think sometimes it was far away, but it's still
It is a movement. Near. It's a very vocal movement, but it actually never translates into laws. But it does in America.
It does in America. Enforced sterilization was on the books in the United States in several states in the Deep South until the 1970s. There are whole tranches of communities that were forcibly sterilized in the United States. And it will not surprise you, David, I'm sure you already know this, to know that a very high proportion of the people who were forcibly sterilized in the United States history were African American.
Yeah, I think it's 31 states passed eugenics laws in this period.
Yeah. One essay she published called for a lethal chamber to eliminate society's most burdensome people. And that should sound terrifyingly familiar.
Yeah. So these were policies in the 1970s, right? I think they said up to 1972. So this is not something that we should think is far-fetched in our era today. Only that this is no longer going to be necessarily by humans, but we're going to see that we're seeing a lot of that being done through technology. Wow, I did not know this. Yes, it is. It is. Yeah, it is. And it's sad. It is sad. And we saw the interview with Tony Brown and other people that we're seeing. But let us look at this last one that I had saved, Eugenics on the Rise, by somebody who was alarmed, warning us about the fact that this is a movement
over the next 4 years, just as a matter of survival. I think one of the ones that is most certainly going to need a lot of attention and people power is the fight against eugenics and scientific racism. I bring that up for two reasons, the first of which being this battle against DEIA now, the A being accessibility, and comments made directly by the administration suggesting that the plane crash that happened in DC was a result of disabled people being hired, and not perhaps the fact that there was no acting FAA director because the previous one was pushed out by Trump and Elon Musk, and that there's a severe understaffing of air traffic controllers, which they also put a hiring freeze on. The second of which being comments made during RFK's confirmation hearings. Senator Also Brooks from Maryland asked him whether or not he thinks that Black people and white people should be given the same vaccine schedules, and this is what he said.
What different vaccine schedule should I have received?
I mean, the pollen article suggests that Blacks need fewer antigens.
This is so dangerous.
You get the same measles vaccine.
Speaking as someone who has been denied adequate pain medication after an abdominal surgery and have had family die as a result of medical racism, I say this without any equivocation whatsoever. These attitudes and baseless theories are going to result in people getting killed. And no one should be under the impression that their health and livelihood outcomes aren't going to eventually be affected as well just because you're not Black or disabled or of some other group that's a common target of eugenics and race science. We saw that on Tuesday when a DEIA witch hunt in the federal government led to all federal grant and loan programs being shuttered to everyone. And we saw it in our totally botched pandemic response the first time, and in the wake of a tuberculosis outbreak and this rapidly developing bird flu situation. I don't think we would want the person running the Department of Health and Human Services to believe at a baseline that different races should be given different amounts of vaccines. If vaccines end up being a priority at all, because he not only has quite the anti-vax record, he said himself that he wants to put less focus on infectious diseases. So if you haven't been putting energy into this, now is a good time to start. And if you live in a state with a Republican senator, for the love of God, call them and tell them not to confirm this man. Luckily, he's already on thin ice, but he most certainly does have a chance at actually becoming the new HHS director.
So Kennedy can play both sides, right? He's a very cunning guy, and he can play both sides. He can be a Democrat. He can also be a Republican. And I think that he's an excellent guy that we should use for someone that can cross the aisle when it's convenient to them. Because who would have thought that Kennedy would be working with Donald Trump, right? You'd have thought that his ideas would be opposed to his, because he is a close friend of the Clintons, and he has voted Democrat all his life. Kennedy, because his father belonged to the Democratic Party. But you see that these guys can work, and they will work comfortably with the people who they want to work with, because at the end of the day, the agenda is the same. It's not the personalities who are heading these sort of institutions. So that is something that we have to understand. It is still on the rise. It's still resurging. And how will we try to say to people that this is something that they need to pay attention to? I don't think they are, because again, we think we are living in modern times. And modern times mean that people's minds are modern and sophisticated, and these things won't happen. Remember, I told you that slavery took place during the period during which Europe was enlightened, was when slavery actually surfaced. If you read the history of Germany also, when Hitler came on the scene, Germany was also the height of its civilization, right? And that was what took place, because the more people learn and the more they think they are enlightened, let me just say this, if there is no higher authority than man to say that this is not true and you can't do this, it's not right, it's not moral, it's not ethical, they will do what they want to do. And we know our imaginations, whether you're a good guy or a bad guy, when we're studying and we are exposed to new information, our imagination and curiosity can run wild. The best of us, right? If you have like the Galtons rather, the Francis Galtons, they were not necessarily maybe started out being evil, but as they studied things and they observed things, then their minds and their curiosities went wild. And then he started saying, but I observe this is happening and that is happening. But he's not, he doesn't have knowledge that is pervasive, right? He's not all knowing. So he can't know everything. And that's what they do. They pretend like they know everything. They use science or religion or whatever as a weapon and say that it is. And I'm happy that Stephen is mentioning this point. I agree with what she's saying about the church. Let me just say about the church that you mentioned here. Yeah, you said that, and let's not forget that they use the black church to get away with this nonsense. Right, but they use all at their disposal. Remember now that, the United States was founded on the principle that there should be a separation of church and state, right? So the religion first, they use false religion to justify slavery. But people are saying, well, the church should be separate from the state. And they couldn't do that. So they say, let's go to science and show them that it's not only religion or faith that suggests that blacks are inferior to whites, but the science also says it. And this is where now people are going to be deceived, because they say it's not just a matter of faith now. This is real evidence coming from science. So science is even going to be used more as a tool than religion, because religion is faith. And people will say, oh, it's just empty faith that person is espousing, right? But with science and with data, it's more convincing, and people will listen, right? Because it is science, and that is what we have to understand. But they do use the black leaders of the religious leaders to deceive people. I agree 100%. But I think in this case here, science is going to be much more deceiving, because science and technology coming together is powerful. And the AI and some of these things that AI can produce, it will make you really, really say this is true. Let us look at at TikTok. Some of the videos I see on TikTok, do you really know if they're for true or it's not true? I can't tell. A lot of what I see on TikTok, I don't know if it's true or it's not true. Right? The videos are so convincing, and many of them are AI produced. So what happens when AI begins to produce science that makes you think that what you're seeing is real? Because it's going to look real. It's going to look real. What are you going to say? Now, I agree with what she's saying, but don't we have somewhat different genes than our white brothers and sisters? I believe that, yes, that blacks would have some types of different genes in terms of we have more dominant genes, and Europeans have more recessive genes. But it does mean, therefore, that we ought to generalize. Secondly, environment also impacts our genes, and we also have been here for a long time, so our genes might be impacted. The same genes, perhaps, that the Jamaicans have might not necessarily be the same genes that Black Americans have, because of the different environments in which we live. And that is why even during the pandemic, and in some cases the cooler climate, those who were in cooler climates from those who were in warmer climates, people responded to the pandemic much differently. So we've got to look at things differently, because environment also impacts our genes and stuff like that. Immigration and how long you've been in that environment for. Remember now that all of us came from Africa, including Europeans. But as they immigrated to different places, to Asia, to Europe, and other places on the planet, people began to respond to the environment in which they live. That's why we look differently, and our genes might appear to register differently. But we're coming from the same, mother and father, essentially, but our environment also impacts on our genes, right? So we can't group people and say that everybody is this way, because that's going down on a very slippery slope, and that is where eugenics come into being, and people think that one size fits all, and it is not true. It's not true. So let us examine everybody, accordingly in terms of what is their problem, But we can't say all black people are this or all black people are that, or white people are this and white people are that, right? I have people who think that black people can fight better than white people, or black people are more, hostile than white people, and that's not true. Some are, and some white people are more hostile than blacks are. Okay, so this is what we have to understand. Humans are not necessarily what we think they are as a group, right? How many people might see you Barbadians, or they see Chinese people, or they see another group of people, and they think that they're going to, they love rice. Chinese people love rice, right? And many of them don't, right? But it's just this sort of stereotypes that we have of these people, and what we see them do here in the Caribbean, and the foods that they serve us, when perhaps they don't eat that food, but they're selling you the food, because that's how they make their money. That's what we like in the Caribbean, rice and other things, right? So we have to be very careful. So yeah, I agree with you though, Stephen, that we do have some traits that we share as a group, but we still need to be properly assessed, and we cannot, group people into things and say that everybody demonstrates the same type of genes, because it might not necessarily be so. Secondly, in the diaspora here, black people have different genes too. We are mixed up with what? Some with European, some with Asian, and you have all these genes coming together, right? So it's very difficult. So what is black? What do we define as black? Because that person, might have other, genes in the Indian genes, Chinese genes, whatever genes, Japanese genes in them, and then it becomes a little bit more problematic and complex. So we're not pure. We don't have pure black genes, and we don't have pure white genes, particularly here in the diaspora, because of the interactions of different populations, demographics that have been living here for centuries. When we think about, we have been here for centuries, people. So we cannot think that we are going to be, having the same African gene as the person living in Africa. And even in Africa too, Africa has all the genes, as we can see, because, civilization started there. So they have all the gene and all the gene types. That's why people were able to become white and become Asian looking, because the genes were already there. Right? Do you know that Adam was born with all the genes? That's why we are different. He was born with all of the gene types. The blood type, gene type was in him. Right? So that is how we are. We came about, and science now is beginning to behave as if they can, state everything there. They know where we came from. At the same time, we are going down dangerous route in terms of, how do we know that the earth is billions of years, and that the first man, was, probably an ape or a monkey, and eventually we evolved into the state that we are? They have no evidence. They have just speculations, and it would have been okay if the speculations were that we were equal, but there's no way that you are going to be evolving first of an animal form and then into a human form, and then it is natural to think that the person who evolved into the human form is superior, right? To me, I don't think that is racism if that's what you believe. If you believe that scientific, truth, if that is truth to you, right, then why are you upset if they say that black people are inferior? And it doesn't make any sense to, because when did black people begin to get to human form? When did we get to the human form? Were we interacting with the white people to have, gotten that sort of human form? It's weird. It's a lot of speculations, and you go down a rabbit hole that you probably cannot come out of. Right, with this sort of evolutionary theory. Interesting, but it's not for black people or people of African descent, because we did not evolve in that way where we were just some little midget. We came from a sophisticated civilization. At the same time, the same people who say that they believe in the evolutionary theory, they're telling you that we were kings and queens in Africa, right? And we had a complex civilization, and our art was second to none, and our science was second to none. Oh yeah, and we were animals, right? And our science was second to none. How did we, create this sort of all these pyramids, being, these in this animal form, or did we evolve by then into beings, into human beings, when we created the pyramids? Maybe, right? But these are some very, speculative theories that we have to be careful of. And when humans form these theories, by the way, then they pretend as if they're gods because they can tell you where you came from, and then they form policies that say this is it, and they set the standards for you. Now, don't get me wrong. If you want to believe that, I don't have a problem with it. If that is your perspective, if that's your worldview, I have no problem with it because that is what you believe in. What I don't want you to do, however, and I should not do too, is we can share our different worldviews with each other, but don't tell me that I should ascribe to yours, and you don't tell me that you should subscribe to mine, right? So, or I shouldn't tell you that you should subscribe to mine. That's what I want to say. But the fact is that that's what they're doing. They're telling us that this is the truth and this is the science, and you have to follow it. If you don't, then you are going to be you're going to be killed. Let me go down. Let me get to your point, Stephen. I think Stephen is saying here that is their timeline, and their timeline doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense in terms of telling us about where we came from, and we were at the bottom, and we're still at the bottom, by the way, right? They still have made us stay at the bottom. So they're telling us, they're inferring to us that that's where we came from and we must remain there. That is our place, right? We are never going to be equal with them because that is what the theory of evolution suggests, all right? That we can never evolve. Yet at the same time, black people subscribe to it, but they say they complain against racism and saying, but racism is scientific. Scientific racism is what it is. That's what formed the whole racialized categories of people, right? First, it started out with religion, as Stephen is saying, but the religion did not hold much water because that was just religion, blind religion. Now they said, if we want to convince people, we've got to use stats and science and mathematics to show people that that is the situation, So that is what we need to understand. Any questions? Any comments? All right, so thank you so much for joining. I think that this was an interesting. Make sure you like the live before you leave, and these are discussions that we need to have now because we're heading down into some very dangerous times, and we will have to go through, tread this water, some of us alone, and you've got to get these things out because, trust me, these things are in the pipeline, and we've got to get our minds prepared. Maybe you won't be physically prepared, but if your mind are not prepared for it, because it's a mind, that is going to have to be strong, right? Thank you so much, Marie. It's a mind that has to be strong. It's not they're attacking our minds, right? It's not so much the physical warfare now. It's the mental, the mind control, right? Where they're telling us that they are superior, they have superior knowledge, and we must listen to them. If we don't, then we are not going to survive, and that is what they're telling us. It's coming through medicine, it's coming through education, and we saw what happened to Jason our day, and we spoke about that at length, and this is all of the resuscitation, the reincarnation of eugenics, the fact that we are just some people who they need to be sorry for, to be pitied, and they use us in the way that they can, and then they get rid of us. So we've got to be very careful with these people. And by the way, they've always done it. W.E. Du Bois, all of these people, W.E. Du Bois thought he was loved by them, That's why he talked about the talented 10th. And he was against Marcus Garvey, right? And he was used and abused, and they spat him out, right? All the Hoovers, the J. Edgar Hoovers, and all of the other black people who thought that they were selected few among these white people, and that they preferred them, we eventually find out that they really don't like us. I think even Martin Luther King Jr., to some extent, found out that they really didn't like him too. And when he started now dealing with what they're doing and talking about the root causes of our black problem, then they unalived him, All right, so don't think that this thing is just happening to Jason or Day. It happened to Malcolm X, all of these leaders. You know, well, Malcolm X was always against what they were doing, and he was never a friend of any white person. But the fact is, that is how they do. They befriend you, and they say that you are cut above the other, and they try to be nice to you, and they use you against your brother and your sister, right? Or your own people. So that is it tonight. If there's no other comment, we can go and get some sleep, right? Thank you so much for joining. And maybe we just have to have the pre-recorded videos. Make sure you go and you like and you watch the pre-recorded video I did today about the YouTube suppression of the videos, and like it, watch it, and comment and leave a comment so that the video can move along. But maybe we need to just do some pre-recorded videos until the momentum increases, because it's almost like it's extracting too much energy from me, and the live is taking too much, and it's just not giving me any sort of encouragement. Thank you. It was, as usual, wonderful. And thank you. You are the ones who make it wonderful. It's not me. I am just here to facilitate it, and you respond and you sort of extract whatever is in me as I am giving to you also. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll have another one when it's convenient. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.